Hey y'all, it's Laura and welcome back to another process video. This one is using Cocoa Vanilla Studio's new These Days collection. And I have this really cool cut file that I created for myself back when I had a silhouette. I do not have one any longer, but I kept it to use as a template to recreate this design over and over and over again, and I would never need to cut it out again. I clearly did not enjoy having a cutting machine because I'd rather do this than try to cut it out over and over again. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and punch some stitching holes around the perimeter of this circle. And once those are all cut out, I am going to go ahead and cut out the center of my cardstock as well so that I can layer some pattern paper behind it. So just starting out with a quick pencil line, and then I'll use my X-Acto to get it started, and then I'll come in with scissors later on to finish off the circle. I do find the X-Acto is a nice way to get a crisp, clean line, and that may just be because I have a lot of practice with the X-Acto knife. If you remember back in the day of paper piecing, I did a lot of hand cut paper piecing, and the X-Acto came in handy a lot. So I'm fairly proficient with an X-Acto knife now. But I do prefer my scissors as they are a little bit faster. So using this absolutely gorgeous painty striped paper, I'm going to go ahead and cut out a circle to fit in the center. And the way I'm going to make this work is I'm going to trace out the center with my pencil, but then I'm going to cut it out, leaving about a 1/4 inch edge around what I drew so that I have paper to glue in behind this cut file, or this cut file wannabe. And that's just the way, see, I'm leaving just about a 1/4 inch between the circle I drew and my cut line, and that's going to give me a little bit of space to glue it in there. I have done that wrong in the past. We live and learn, right? And that was my fixing of the previous mistake, is just to simply leave about a 1/4 inch there to glue on. So now here is my painty circle. I want it to be horizontal stripes. I'm going to go ahead and glue that into place and tuck in my photos inside of the circle. Now these photos are of my youngest child. She is a huge fan of trees, and given the opportunity would spend quite a lot of time outside just finding ways to climb up into the trees even when she was too little to climb trees. These photos are from 4 years ago when she was only 4, and she found ways to get up into the trees even when she was too little to climb them. And one of those ways was to climb on top of her little Tyke's car, and she got up there and got into the tree. So I'm going to take these two photos, I'm going to mat them on white cardstock, and then tuck them into the circle. Now, here is a mistake that I made with this one. I learn every time I do this. I should have tucked my photos in before gluing the circle down, because it was very difficult to tuck these in after I glued the circle down. So again, we're learning from mistakes, and next time I hopefully won't do this. My way of fixing it was I traced out the circle edge with a pencil onto my photo, and then cut that bit out so I didn't have as much to tuck in and didn't interfere with the glue's contact, keeping that pattern paper to the white cardstock. But for future reference, I would generally recommend you tuck in your photos before gluing down the background paper. Now, pulling in the A5 paper stack, I had a few beautiful papers I considered for matting my photos. Now, this coral red is beautiful, but it doesn't help the photos pop off of that painty background. So I knew I needed to go with something a little stronger, and this wood grain worked beautifully to give it a nice dark edge that pops off of that background and make sure that the photos stay the focus of my layout. Now, the whole time I was creating this layout, it was funny the things that kept coming into my mind. One of the first one was about the Lorax, this Dr. Seuss story where he speaks for the trees. That's going to come in later. Another thing that I was thinking about was how much I really enjoy hand stitching and just don't do it often enough on my layout. So I wanted to make sure to incorporate some hand stitching. I just love the texture and the dimension that it adds to a layout. It just gives it a really handmade feel, as well as adding a little extra detail that makes it really special in my mind. So here I am tracing out the edge of the circle onto my photos so that I can trim them back and just tuck a slight edge in underneath instead of trying to tuck those full corners in. This ends up working well because I have to stitch on this layout as well. I don't want to have to stitch through the photos too. It'll be much easier to do it this way and tuck those in to the center without having to stitch through them to get my outside wreath done. Now, to keep my stitching subtle, I am going to do tone on tone with white. With the DMC colors, this is B5200, and it's a nice clean white that works really well with this particular cardstock. And so I'm going to tie off a knot at the end, and then I'm going to be doing a braided stitch, also known as a chain stitch. It's a fairly simple stitch, but it gives a lot of thick bulk to your stitching. So it's not just a straight line. It looks like each section is braided together with the next section. So I'm showing you how to do this stitch very quickly here. I have come up through one hole, go back down the same hole, leave a small loop, and then come up through the next hole and then through your loop and continue the same thing. So you're going to go back down into that same hole, leave a small loop, come up through the next hole, and then back up through the loop. And that way all of your stitches are connected to each other, and it creates this really thick braided stitch. Now I am using all 6 strands of the embroidery floss because I want this to function as a border around my circle. So it just gives it a really nice finished look to have that thick stitched edge around the outside. Because right now, with that pattern paper behind it, it has kind of a rough feeling to it, and adding that braided stitch really gives it a more finished, polished feel. Now, bringing in my florals, these are fussy cut from one of the beautiful pattern papers, and I knew that I wanted my title to be fairly long. So I'm going to make sure that I leave enough room for the title when I'm adding in my florals. I've put in a couple of placeholders here while that Dr. Seuss title comes into play. It is going to be I Speak for the Trees, because I feel that if she had the words, my daughter would 100% advocate for trees. She's a huge fan. And spends as much time as she can up in them. So I've got 2 floral placeholders there. I knew I wanted clusters in the top right corner of that right photo and the bottom right corner. And why I'm putting clusters there initially is to cover up the sort of rough edges where I've tucked in my photo to that circle. So if you have mistakes on your page that you feel the need to cover up, don't worry. These are just opportunities to embellish a little bit more creatively on your page. Don't look at it as, oh, I messed this up. No, look at it as an opportunity to embellish creatively on top of that mistake. It's just opening up another option for you. Bringing in the clear stickers, I'm going to use these little trees at the beginning and the end of the title, as well as bring in some of these really sweet black frondy branches that I'm going to tuck in behind my floral clusters. I'll move them a few times, and that actually worked out really well. I was concerned they wouldn't re-stick once I pulled them back up, but they actually did, which was great. So I'm going to trim them down to the perimeter of the circle so that they fit in right nicely with that edge, and then I'll place my fussy cut florals on top of them. So this layering creates the appearance of dimension on the page by having the sticker in the background and having the fussy cut floral in the foreground lifted up on top of that braided stitching. It gives it a little bit of lift, but not too much, and it adds a little shadow underneath of the florals. And this is a great way to give the appearance of dimension on your page without adding a ton of bulk to it. But don't you worry, we'll be adding plenty of bulk to this layout later on. So now I have trees on either end of the title. I thought that was a really cool effect to just bring in the whole topic of trees into the embellishments. I'm adding another one of those clear branches, and then I'm going to bring in some of the black cross hatch sort of stickers and use those as a tiny bit of detailing around the trees, because if you look at the shape of the trees, they end rather abruptly, high at the top, really thin at the bottom, and I thought that it really needed a softening of that edge. So as you'll see, these little crosses bring that line, that visual line, back down to the stitched edge instead of having it top of the tree. And that nice tiny little detail really helps to blend it in with the rest of the embellishments and the circle edge itself. So again, initially I was just going to do a few small clusters. I have one here at the top right of the photo, one at the bottom right of the photo, and one at the left of the second photo. But this didn't feel like quite enough to me. I felt like it needed a bigger presence with these florals on the layout, and I also felt like that bottom bit there where the photos meet the edge was a little bit awkward. So I'm going to bring in more florals to connect the leftmost cluster to the center cluster. So I'll have one big row of florals across the bottom, and then we'll have another cluster up by the title. And this just helps to guide your eye all the way through the layout. You could start up at the title and it cycles down into the photos. So eventually the photos are the main focus and will grab your eye for the longest period of time. When I cluster my florals, I tend to start with the larger pieces and then fill in with smaller and smaller sizes. So if you're having difficulty with floral clustering, try that out first. Put in your larger pieces and spread them out just a little bit, and then fill in the gaps with medium and then smaller florals, and then use teeny tiny florals or enamel dots or some other sort of scattering type detail work, and put those around the edges like I am here. Now this 3 clusters could have worked. It could have been fine. So if you would prefer to do something along this line, it totally works. I just wanted a little bit more, and part of that is just my antsiness of wanting to use all of the floral bits, because I am a huge fan of florals, especially Cocoa Vanilla, and this is a new collection, so I'm just absolutely can't wait to dive in. Could not stop myself, had to add more florals, and once I start adding florals, I continue adding florals, and just followed that line until the two connected and said, well, that'll balance out my title quite nicely, because my title is rather heavy across the top, so having a matching level of heaviness at the bottom does balance out that big title at the top. So you can look at it that way as well. One of the things that was very important to me was to leave plenty of white space around the outside of the circle. I wanted to make sure that the center of the layout was the focus and that it had plenty of open space to breathe, if you will, to balance out all the busyness of these florals. When you go in crazy with embellishing or using some bright colors, it's very helpful to then have some open white space or just blank space, whether it's white cardstock or not, that allows the layout to have a bit of a break, gives the eye a visual break from the busy areas and balances them out with empty areas. This also helps to make sure that the focus is on your photos, because you're going to keep most of your embellishing close to your photos. A quick question for all of you. How do you feel about fussy cutting? I know I have a few fans of the fussy cutting on the channel, and they would love to see more of that, but are there some of you who find it a bit boring or hard on the hands, things like that? Or maybe you just don't have the patience for it. I will tell you, as a quick tip, that fussy cutting is one of those things that is brilliant to keep your hands busy when you're watching TV or you're waiting in a doctor's appointment. That is where I do the majority of my fussy cutting. Often we'll sit down in the evenings for my kiddos to watch a movie, and I will sit there and fussy cut florals. And that's a great way to have something going on with your hands, to feel productive while you're also leisurely enjoying some time with the family. Now bringing in some of those 3D buttons that I absolutely adore. They are so pretty, to add a little pop onto these florals, and then filling in a couple of gaps with some fussy cut butterflies as well. These were from the ephemera pack, and I went ahead and cut off the white border around the outside. I do this because it helps to blend in a little bit better with the background, and if I leave the white border on, I feel like it highlights the individual pieces a little bit too much, and it's harder for me to cluster them into groupings. Now we're wrapping up the layout. I'm going to add some little butterfly trails with some Nuvo in gold, and then I'll take that Nuvo and dot around my clusters of florals as well, which gives a little pop of sparkle, as well as adding a enamel dot style with smaller sizes. So little dots, little kind of controlled splattering around the outside of my clusters. And then I'll come in with some Heidi Swapp Color Shine to do some splattering around my florals as well. Now I do finish off this layout with a few more details, but before that, make sure you go check out the Coco Vanilla blog at cocovanilla.com.au to see all the detailed photos and the little write-up I did on this layout and how it came together. I thought this needed just a few more things, so I'm going to add in a little tab above the left photo and then a little word phrase that says "love you" to finish it off. Until next time, bye y'all!